Sometimes it takes a second to. Now it's recording.
Okay, sorry. So I'm going to start from the beginning so we can make sure we get all of it on the recording. So again, this meeting is a virtual community meeting for NPA 2021-0021.01. It's a smart housing project. My name is Maureen Meredith. I'm a planner with the Housing and Planning Department, and I do all the plan amendment cases that come through the city. Please let us know who you are in the chat box. We use this as our sign-in sheet. If you are associated with an organization, if you could please provide that as well. Please mute your microphone if you are joining by phone, and also to turn off your video if you are participating through online, and to also turn off your microphone as well, because that helps save bandwidth. How to participate today. You will see on the screen there's a speech bubble in the menu bar at the bottom of the screen. It will open the chat box where you can type in questions at any time. After presentations, you can click on the raise hand icon to be called on to speak. So as I mentioned, my name is Maureen Meredith. I do all the plan amendment cases, and we'll go ahead and introduce staff participating and the applicants and agents who are also participating tonight. So Mark, would you like to go next?
Yes, good evening. My name is Mark Walters. I'm a principal planner with the Housing and Planning Department, and I'll be moderating tonight's questions. And for the applicant?
Hi, I'm Walter Moreau. I'm the Executive Director of Foundation Communities. Sabrina Butler and several other staff are on the call as well to help answer questions when they come up.
Okay. Would anybody else from the applicants like to introduce themselves?
Hi, this is Connor Kinney with Civilitude and Capital A Housing. We're providing support to Foundation Communities, and we're here to answer any technical questions about zoning or any of the area planning that y'all might have.
Thanks, Connor. I'm Sabrina Butler, here with Foundation Communities, here to answer any questions.
Okay. If there's no one else, we'll go ahead and move on. So again, here's my contact information. Kate Clark is the zoning case manager for the case. She is not participating in this meeting tonight, but if we are not able to answer any specific zoning questions that we have between the staff and the applicants, we can certainly reach out to Kate after the meeting and get back to people with any answers that we may need to get back to them with. So the agenda tonight, we will go over basic case information, guidelines for group discussion, how to participate in the process, why is there a plan amendment application, what is a future land use map. After this brief presentation, the applicant will have a presentation, and then we will open the floor to the questions and answers. So again, it's in the East Riverside Old Torf planning area. The property address is 2105 Parker Lane, 7.82 acres. The plan amendment case number is NPA 2021-0021.01.SH, and that stands for Smart Housing. Project name is Parker Apartments. The request is to change the future land use map from civic to multifamily land use. The associated zoning case number is C14-2021.0008.SA. The request is to change the zoning from SF3NP to MF4NP for multifamily apartments. The property owner is Ward Memorial Methodist Church, Kevin Reed. The applicant is Foundation Communities, Walter Moreau. Here are the guidelines. Due to the need for social distancing, in-person questions and comments have been moved to this online format. We will allow everyone to speak. Please listen respectfully and actively. Criticize ideas and not individuals. Commit to learning and not debating. Avoid blame, speculation, inflammatory language. Avoid assumptions about others, especially based on their perceived social group. And staff reserves the right to delete offensive language and remove offenders from the meeting. I have to note we have had no problem thus far with any participants we've had with our virtual meetings. Guidelines for group discussion. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat at any time during this meeting. After staff and applicant presentations, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand by clicking the hand symbol on the menu bar. Telephone participants will be able to speak during the Q&A session of the meeting. Attendees will be muted upon arrival and through the staff and applicant presentations. Then staff will open the floor to answer questions in the chat or by attendees raising their hands to speak. Similar questions may be grouped and answered together. Please mute your microphone when not speaking for the sake of sound quality and clarification of conversation. If you are having connection issues, please turn off your video until called upon to ask your questions. If you have questions after this meeting, you can email us and we will make the answers available at the speakupaustin.org/MPA website. You can email the case managers with any questions or comments that you have. Any written comments will be added to staff case reports. If you live within 500 feet, you will get in the mail the public hearing notice once it's been scheduled for Planning Commission and City Council. So why is there a plan amendment application? Neighborhood plans are adopted by City Council as amendments to the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. City Charter requires zoning changes to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. Most neighborhood plan amendments are amendments to the neighborhood plan's future land use map, and most neighborhood plan amendment applications have an associated zoning application. This map shows the areas in blue that have City Council approved neighborhood plans, most of which have a future land use map. Future land use map looks like this. This is the East Riverside Old Torf future land use map. And these colors represent broad land uses. So for this property, the current land use is civic, and it is represented at the light blue. And the proposed land use is multifamily, which is the orange color. And these broad land uses have typical zoning districts that are considered consistent with the particular land use category. For example, the orange multifamily land use is consistent with the typical zoning districts of MF1 to multifamily 6. The blue land use can have various zoning districts, and this one happens to have the zoning of SF3. Although some blue civic land uses, the property is zoned P public. This is an aerial photo of the property. The property is outlined in blue. I like to put in this Google map to kind of show the surrounding uses of the property. Here's just some Google map pictures of the property. And I just sort of take a few snapshots of property, Parker Lane looking south and looking north. And this is the future land use map. The yellow is single family. You can see some red and pink along I-35. And the areas to the east that don't have land use, those properties were not included in the future land use map. So that's why the FLUM does not show a land use category on that, on those properties. This map shows the zoning on the property and the surrounding zoning. There's some MF2 to the north, MF3 to the east, has some GR to the southeast, and we have some LR SF6 to the west. This map shows the property in relation to the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan and the Growth Concept Map. Then we overlaid some bus routes and bus stops that are surrounding the property. And next will be presentation by the applicant. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Maureen. Thanks, Maureen. I'm going to pull up my presentation. It might take just a moment to get
Okay.
Oriented. It's coming. Just a moment.
While Sabrina's opening up the PowerPoint, I'll introduce myself. I'm Walter Moreau, the Director at Foundation Communities. I'm really grateful for everybody on the call tonight, and we're excited to share our plans and what we're dreaming of building at the Parker Lane Methodist Church site. I've been the Director at Foundation Communities for about 25 years. This is building affordable housing and learning centers and other programs has really been my passion. Foundation Communities is an Austin organization. We're homegrown. We're over 30 years old. We were started by a group of folks from the University of Texas, some students in the co-op housing movement. We've never sold a property in Austin. So on the next slide, there's a picture of the 23 communities that we have all around town, north, south, east, and west. Our most recent family apartments were at Mueller. We built the Jordan at Mueller. I have some more pictures a little bit later that show the different communities that we've built. But the Jordan at Mueller is 132 apartments and a learning center, really close to the HEB, very high design. What we will build at Parker will be very similar in terms of quality and green building. And as I've mentioned, we've never sold a property. So we hope that if you have questions and concerns, you'll take an opportunity to go visit any of our properties. We'd also, if you can tour them on your own, but if you'd like a tour, we can all wear masks and do a distant tour outside as well, so you can see what we do. Next slide. Our model is really housing and services. We have 11 learning centers in Austin. In normal times, we have after-school program for about 1,000 kids. We're very proud of that program. Our kids have a 3.4 GPA. We do pre-K programs in the morning. The learning centers have a host of different programs at night. Computer classes, English classes. We have a partnership with ACC to do a humanities course, writing classes. The learning centers are really the heart of the community. There's generally weekly supper clubs. We're not in person in a lot of the learning centers right now, but we're very excited and hopeful about the summer that will be open again. Next slide. So what we've designed for Parker Lane is 135 apartment homes on the 8 acres. That's about 17 units to the acre, which is much lower density than what you would see from a conventional apartment builder. This is the kind of site where it would be easy to imagine an apartment builder putting 300, 400 apartment units. We want to preserve as much green space as we can, and our design is really focused on larger families with kids. So we're mostly 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom apartments. Typical incomes are in the $20,000 to $50,000 range, and an average rent of about $900 a month. The learning center will have support staff, case managers there. all of our new properties have been built as green as we can. We've never sold a property, so we think of ourselves as a lifetime forever owner. Everything that we can do to lower our carbon footprint and reduce utility bills for residents just makes the property more affordable. We have food pantries in the learning centers, other health programs and fitness classes. These are all, everything at the learning center is free for the whole neighborhood. We do the big in-person class when we can do that is Zumba. Right now it's all online, but I'm sure it'll be back in person before too long. At Parker Lane, the United Methodist Church has currently they have some offices for their Justice for Our Neighbors program, and they've asked that we include a few offices in the design for that immigration service. So we're excited about that. We partner with lots of other groups around town to also provide services in the Learning Center for the community. And I think the next slide Sabrina's going to review is our the schematic site plan that we've got at this point in time.
Yeah, thanks, Walter. I'll keep it pretty brief because we're in very early design stage, but we did want to have something to show y'all. This shows, I wish I had a pointer view, but the buildings are sort of in the center of the site. We've got parking on the outside, and we've been trying to make sure we're leaving as much open space, green space as possible on the site. This, as I mentioned, is very early, so it's still subject to change, but the site in a way designs itself. We're trying to preserve all of the existing gorgeous trees on the site, so that the large trees you're seeing here are existing. And then as those familiar with this neighborhood are aware, there's some topography on the site and some slope, and we're trying to maneuver around that as best we can. We'll continue to look for ways to reduce the impervious cover, which is already well below what would be allowed by the zoning we're seeking, but we're looking to continue to find opportunities to reduce it further. We've designed plenty of parking on the site. What we really want to make sure we're doing is preventing any spillover into the neighborhood. We don't want to provide any additional impacts on parking in the neighborhood, so we want to make sure we're accommodating all the parking here on site. The kind of bluer areas at the front and the back of the site are the lowest point of the site in the back, and kind of a downslope in the front is where we plan to handle the water quality. That may be a question that comes up. We'll plan a lovely rain garden for the front and a pond in the back. So just wanted to explain what that color and notation is. We'll have a courtyard there in the middle of the buildings, and then the building here that's labeled as leasing also will have some of our on-site services. We'll have case management located in that building. And this also is where we'll have the space for the United Methodist Church and their nonprofit partners, as Walter described. We're going to keep as many of the current activities they've had serving the neighborhood present on the site as possible. The little pavilion at the back in the grove of trees, that's not a building. It will be more of a covered kind of outdoor space, recycling the slab of an existing structure that's there so as not to disrupt the trees and the roots over there. And that's really, wanted to keep it pretty high level for now. Expect there will be plenty of questions and we can dig back into it. But wanted to just give you a preview of our very early thinking about the site. And I will take to the next slide and turn it back over to Walter.
Yeah, we wanted to just share some pictures of some of our other communities that we've built in the last 4 or 5 years. This is Homestead Oaks on Slaughter Lane near Brody and Slaughter. There's a Randall's there at that corner, and we're kind of set back from behind that. Example of the green space and outdoor playground. This whole building was really built around preservation of all the trees that are there. We collect all the rainwater from the rooftops and use that for irrigation. Next slide. This is our Lakeline Station community, which is far north Austin, walkable to the Red Line Lakeline train station. We're very proud of this learning center. It is almost a fully sustainable building was the focus of design here. So you can see all the electric solar panels. And the next slide. This is our M Station apartment. We actually built M Station about 13 years ago. It's in East Austin, about 1.25 miles east of the University of Texas. 150 apartments, some 3-story and some 4-story buildings, couple playgrounds, and a really big learning center there, 8,000 square feet, plus a childcare center with open door preschool. I think if you want to see a property and how it ages, M Station is a good example. You can go by and see the quality that we manage our own properties, and so we're not selling them. This isn't Section 8 housing. We want these communities to really be beautiful and stay that way, and be a place where people are really proud of where they live. And I can happy to answer more questions about our management practice and what we do. Cardinal Point is in far northwest Austin, the 4 Points neighborhood. 120 apartments, large learning center there. Lots of community partners. There's not a lot of community space in 4 Points. So the Girl Scouts, tutoring programs, other people use our learning center building. Next slide. I'm going to just wrap up, and a lot of times people wonder who lives there, and the answer is it's people people that you know from school, from work, from church, people that may are part of our community, that may mow your lawn and cut your hair or watch your kids in childcare. And very often it's people that may be friends or somebody that's in your family. We want to keep Austin affordable for everyone. This is for all of us. And most of our residents are hardworking folks, just make less than $50,000 a year, and that's a tight budget in Austin. I'll stop there. Thank you for letting us share this presentation and the plans for Parker. I'm happy to, Mark, I guess you facilitate questions. I'm happy to answer questions.
Sure, we do have a question. Someone has raised their hand. It's a Fred Dworkin. And would you please unmute, sir, and ask your question?
Yeah, so my name's Fred Dworkin, and I've kind of notified the greater community of the potential change from civic to multifamily on this property. And I live right across the street from the property. And if you allow me to share my screen for a couple seconds, I think there's a few things that should be brought to everybody's attention since we have the neighborhood accumulated here. And then, of course, I do have a few different questions. So the first thing that I'll share here is just what we're kind of going to lose, right? This Methodist church property is a very beautiful and iconic property. You can see everybody at this time of the year taking pictures with their family in that property. And that's a picture of myself with some refugee dogs in the early days of the pandemic. Now, we've been here for about 3 years. My background is I was a former Peace Corps volunteer in Panama. That's where I met my wife. I traveled throughout Latin America as a salesperson and get to visit some of the most densely populated cities in the world, cities like Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, Santiago, Medellin, Mexico City. I've been to all of them. I've seen beautiful places, well-planned places. I've seen places that are not necessarily as beautiful. And I admire the Foundation's community. I just got off of visiting 8 of their properties yesterday, actually. And the services that they provide are highly needed. I just don't know that they're necessarily needed in our community. So one thing that you'll notice about our community in the E-Rock here is that it is high density multifamily. And that's one of the questions that I had of Maureen when they sent out the flume, which I guess I understand now. These areas for future consideration weren't included because they already have high density. And I guess the FULM is actually pointing at taking those away, taking those high density out, pulling some of the density out of this neighborhood. The second thing that you'll notice about our neighborhood is the lack of green space, right? people say, well, there's a park right in front of the house there, of the church there. But if you take a look at it and you compare it to just across the freeway, you can go from St. Edward's University on a very nice walk through the Bloom Reserve and then the Bloom Creek Natural Preserve, and then down this creek and through this little park to Travis Heights Elementary, where my daughter goes to school, and to Little Stacy, and make it all the way to the hike and bike trail. And it's extremely pleasant. It's a wonderful walk. You can't do that anywhere on Riverside. You have Mabel Davis to the south. You have our part of the hike and bike trail to the north. And you have this little tiny pocket park, which has no playscape, has no facilities, is a glorified dog park without a fence. And you have one grocery store and then another grocery store here. I admire those foundations communities. They're so beautiful. That Jordan community in Mueller is right behind the HEB, like literally right behind it. Same with the Heritage Oaks one that's out in Slaughter Lane. It's right behind it as well. So what we're looking at is putting basically another property that will be multifamily in its profile right in the middle of an area, and this map actually shows it better, where there is an abundance of multifamily and no green space. That's what I'm concerned about. So my first question is, I would like to understand the financial aspects of this property, because multifamily properties, which this would be, and MF4 facilitates this ability to have a multifamily property, are investment properties. They generate cash flow. Most of the properties I've visited are Class B and Class C properties that the foundation manages. They generate decent cash flow to heavy cash flow whenever it's B or C. So my first question is, what is the financial agreement with the Methodist Church? My second question, and it's equally as important, would be, how intense will the services on this parcel be? And will they be sufficient to facilitate the thousands of children that already live in this vast, dense neighborhood of multifamily complexes, all of which there are currently 1,000 open units right now in this area that I'm signaling, 1,000 open units right now, and there's probably several hundred children. So those are my first two questions, and of course I'll have a few more.
I can respond to those. All of our new construction communities have a combination of housing tax credits, city housing bonds, private philanthropy, especially from St. David's Foundation, Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, Meadows Foundation, Home Depot Foundation, other groups. Our family properties typically do have a small mortgage, so there might be a $5 million or $10 million mortgage somewhere in that ballpark. By having a mortgage that's not too big, that essentially allows us to keep the rents lower and more affordable for the long run. We have a board of directors, volunteers. We've owned our properties in some cases over 30 years. We're very fiscally conservative. We want to make sure we always have the reserves to keep the property in great shape. So our commitment to the community is that the properties need to be beautiful. They need to be maintained at a great level, managed professionally, and not over leveraged in terms of too much debt, so that can be done over the long run.
I think that you're missing the point of my question, and
okay,
that's
sorry.
noble that you guys maintain the properties and that you don't over leverage them. I'm curious about the financial agreement that you have with the owner of the property. From my understanding, the owner of the property is the Methodist Church, and they will remain the owner and they will lease it to you. I'm curious about what kind of cash flow they can expect.
For reasons I don't fully understand, the church did not want to just sell the land outright. They instead proposed a 99-year ground lease, which is for real estate purposes similar to a sale. For all intents, it all reality purposes, we're buying the land, but it will be a ground lease, so it'll revert to them in year 100. We're prepaying that up front, so they're not participating in any cash flow. This is the same structure that if we weren't buying the land or ground leasing it for 99 years, they could do the same thing with a conventional apartment builder, either for upfront payment or for upfront payment plus some cash flow over time. So I hope that answer is clear.
Now, back to your answer about the financing. Is the financing for this project in place, and what budget do you have? And then let's not forget the question about if the services will be intense enough to service the thousands of children that already live here.
Yeah, we're still applying for funding from all the different places that I mentioned. So our goal is to go through the zoning process over the next 3-4 months, as well as pursue the funding, and then hopefully break ground a year from now.
So the financing is not in place yet?
Not completely, no.
Okay. And to the question about the services in terms of the intensity of the services, given the fact that this is already a highly dense neighborhood, as you can see from the map that Maureen shared and all the MF4s and MF3s that are currently around this property. So
we have 11 learning centers, and they average about 60 kids each. Some, like Sierra Vista, has typically over 100 kids. This is pre-COVID, so I think we'll get back to that. The learning center at Parker will also have some capacity in the, I don't know exactly, 80 kid range, depending on how many ages, and that's a good enough size to serve our residents, plus pick up maybe a couple dozen kids from the neighborhood. We're not designing a building that can serve thousands of kids, but certainly the most immediate neighbors would be the priority. Yeah. And I see a question in the chat about the learning center. The after-school program is typically the biggest program in the learning center. Our staff either walks to the school and picks up kids, or if it's served by a bus, then we'll meet the bus. Some of our centers have pre-K programs for that earliest age kids, and then there's adult classes at night. And the learning centers also double as really health centers. There's for fitness classes and food pantry and cooking classes and etc.
Thank you, Walter. You've been very kind.
Okay, before we go to the people with their hands raised, there were several questions in the chat that came up before you raised your hand. So there's 2 of those I'm going to jump to, then we'll go to the people who raised their hands in the order that shows up on my screen. This is from Teresa Claiborne. As affordable housing goes, this one sounds nice. However, I think that it would be better for ever-increasing residents if we had more services. We can find inexpensive apartments here. Let us keep the civic zoning and ensure that the neighborhood has some services that are accessible to all. But I think you kind of answered that. Would you like to add anything to that, Mr. Walter?
No, I think that, if the church were ground leasing or selling the land to a conventional apartment complex, there would not be a learning center. I don't know any other apartment owner builder that does what we do. It would probably be more 1-bedroom apartments and 300 plus units. So I realize that our center won't be able to serve every child in the neighborhood. But what we are doing is way beyond what a conventional apartment would even contemplate.
Okay. The next question is from Paula Kothman. It's difficult for me to grasp how you can build a new property and rent for affordable rates rather than buy one of the many older complexes in the area. Please explain, e.g. lumber costs are super high now.
Yeah, during our history in Austin, we've bought older apartment communities and renovated them, like Sierra Vista, which is pretty close by on St. Elmo and Congress. it's a hard, right now, existing apartments are wildly overpriced. There's investors from all over the world buying that asset class in Austin. And the need for affordable housing is huge. We have waiting lists at all of our properties that are a year or more. So if we can find the right existing apartment complex for sale at a price that works, and especially if it's an older property and it needs renovations, we need to buy it right so we can renovate it right. That's a possibility. But when there's opportunities to build new construction and more housing for the wait list that we've got, we want to pursue that as well.
Okay. So go to the people with their hands up. I think the first person I have is Mike Schofield. Would you unmute and ask your question, sir?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's a really quick question. Currently on the site of the church, there is a trail that cuts through that property and connects to the two apartment complexes that are, fairly low income, tollgate and access array apartments, and connects to the Heritage Oaks neighborhood park across Parker. And I was just curious, I don't think that's, I don't think it's an easement trail or anything like that. I think it's just out of the kindness of the Methodist Church's heart to provide access and a gate to those kind of lower income apartments. And I'm curious if I see that you're showing a trail system on your plan. Is there any thought to keep that trail open? Because I think if it weren't kept open, that would cut off, a lot of these lower income apartment folks from their closest access to a park. And that's my only question. Thanks.
That's a great question, and I don't really know the answer yet. We haven't finalized the civil site plan, but that's the kind of thing we would welcome feedback on and exploring and seeing what's possible. Even if it's not the existing trail, maybe there's another way to make sure that there's still access. Megan Matthews, our design director, is on the call, and Sabrina or Megan, if you want to add anything.
Megan, oh, there's Megan, great.
Hey, yeah, sorry it took me a second. Hi, I'm Megan Matthews, Director of Design for Foundation Communities. I think what Walter said is exactly right. It's something that we're open to exploring with, through conversation with y'all later.
So the next person with their hand up is Mark Gibson. If you would lower your hand, unmute and ask your question, Mark.
Wonderful. I don't know if you can hear me. Let me see if I can.
We can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you all for taking questions and doing this today. Really, I have several questions, but I think the one that I'd like to ask kind of most importantly here is, in our neighborhood plan, which is what we're discussing today, not just the flume, but we have put together a plan. And the plan, I'm reading this from our plan, says that for all proposed redevelopment within the East Riverside Old Dwarf Combined Neighborhood, we really have kind of these specific things that we want to look for. One is first, do no harm. A zoning change affects the property owner, adjacent properties, and property owners in the city. Any change in zoning should be able to demonstrate the benefits of the change in the community, which is, I think, kind of why we're talking today. The second one is preserve single-family homes and the character and assets of our traditional neighborhoods, protect them from further encroachment from non-compatible and/or higher intensity uses by always providing a buffer equal to or greater than the existing buffer. Address the problems of current density before creating opportunities for additional growth and increased density. And so when I go back to the city of Austin did, I'm sure you're all familiar here on the phone, a study. I think the study was called, and this was done last year during COVID, I think August of 2020, called City of Austin Comprehensive Housing Market Analysis. And they did it for every zip code that exists here in Austin. And where I'm getting with this, and I apologize for being long-winded, but I want to kind of put all the facts onto the table, and happy to share my screen because I've got it up. But it shows that in our zip code, we have 80 what is that? 83% of our structures, our housing structures, are currently 2 to 10 plus unit multifamily units. So we have a lot of multifamily already. Of that, the average price, the median rent for those units is $1,000 today. And so if I heard you correctly to say that your average price would be $900, certainly I understand averages, and we'd have some 1 bedrooms and some 2 and 3. And so wondering if we're adding 130 units to an area that already has, call it 19,500 rental units that already have low, income housing associated with it, how would you describe the demonstration of the benefits of the change to the community if the change in the average rent is really kind of 10% as it stands today? Thanks so much.
I think I would reply that what we're building is brand new, high design, permanently affordable housing with the learning center and the services on site. As you all know, Riverside's changing fast, and a lot of the older affordable housing stock that's affordable just because it's old and not maintained, it's rapidly disappearing. So I don't have market data to quote, but I think everybody in the area can see what's rapidly happening, especially with Oracle, and a lot of those older apartments are just falling apart or disappearing or being torn down.
Okay, I have a question from Teresa Claiborne in regards to what is a learning center exactly? Is this like an after-school program, or what are the types of services? I think you described that earlier, but just kind of touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I touched on it already. It's a community center for the residents and the neighborhood, and the focus mainly is education and health. So we partner with lots of other groups and provide services ourselves. There'll be a full-time director at the learning center, with the biggest activity being an after-school program.
Okay. Oh, so there's one person has their hand raised, but there's a bunch of messages in the chat. I'm going to run through some of those, then I'll get to the person with their hand up. The question is from Amato. Why isn't the church asking for this rezoning instead of foundations, which doesn't seem to have the financing in place yet? I
believe that technically the request is from the church. Connor with Civilitude is on the line, and I know this gets a little tricky between owners and applicants and developers, but
yeah, that's right. This is not the applicant signature is technically by the church because they still the landowner. Connor, feel free to ask.
Yeah, every landowner does it differently, and foundation communities, they develop their own properties. As in this case, they assemble all the funding. As in this case, we've seen some comments about not having the funding in place, but this is all very, very normal for a nonprofit that's building permanently affordable housing for families. Foundation communities is one of the best. So this is very usual for how it goes.
And do you have a sense, Walter, of what the construction budget might be? If you can give that out.
Yeah, I'm going to ask. Sabrina's been working on the budget and has those numbers fresh on the top of her head.
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to mistake them probably on the spot. At north 30 to 33 million, I think, is the budget we're looking at right now.
Another question from Nick. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Malkowicz. Another question: why do you need 8 acres multifamily? Why not keep a portion of it civic?
One of the big reasons is it's 8 acres, but at least 3 acres are not buildable because of the topography, the heritage trees, and particularly along the eastern side of the property where there's this sort of a wet weather creek. So we're not maximizing the land that's there and trying to, and then we're still preserving a lot of green space. So it's the civic use here, I think that will continue is the learning center, the playscapes, and the green space that's still preserved.
And there's a question from Crystal Hess. Could you please tell us how this will increase our property values?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Oh, the question is, please tell us how this will increase our property values. I'm not sure of that's the question.
Yeah, what I would say to that is that we have a great track record in Austin. I appreciate Fred mentioned that you visited 8 of our properties. We've not seen any examples where our properties diminish the value of anything around them. I know, honestly, in Austin, the property values have gone up everywhere, but our properties, we track crime rates, they're very low, lower than any areas nearby. And I would just say, please visit and come see the quality of what we do and maintain.
Okay, there's 2 questions here. They're kind of on 2 sides of the same coin. The first question is from Fred Dworkin. What percentage of units will be rental and what percentage will be owned? Many in this community are concerned about home ownership opportunities vis-a-vis affordability. And then the other one, are the rents for these apartments tied to family income? And can you give us some idea what the ranges of rents versus, I think you already did that, but maybe remind people what the rents were and what MFI folks would be living in here.
It will all be rental. There's not a home ownership component. There's a range of incomes, but roughly from around $20,000 to $50,000 a year is the typical income. We've got more details that I can provide later if people want them on the exact breakdown.
And there's another question from Mr. Dworkin. Yes, if the single-family home prices will continue to increase without skipping a beat. This being your project, I assume, is a different asset class. The question is, what will happen if we lose 8 acres that are currently zoned civic in a high-density neighborhood? And I think staff can answer that. Currently, it's zoned single-family 3, but it's designated civic on the future land use map. So I think that answer. I think I addressed that. What will happen?
I would say too that the church, the Methodist Church, a number of churches have closed in the area. They have generally just sold them to the highest bidder, and I think have regretted that and realized when they approached us a year or so ago that they want to do something that has community benefit. And I'm grateful that we've been able to work with them to propose what we are here, and that it's not going to be sold to a conventional apartment builder, and then you'd have 300 plus units on the same piece of land crammed in there without any learning center or community space.
Okay, the other question from Melissa Pepper. What happens if the zoning is changed and for some reason Foundation Communities does not go forward with this project?
The zoning timeline and the financing timeline really run pretty close together through to the summer. So everything should be approved by June, and there won't be a situation where we're not able to go forward at that point.
Okay. Another question, critical issues from Amato. The critical issue to him is changing 8 acres from civic to high density. How is that justified in an area that's already so high density?
I think from a zoning perspective, surrounding uses include the LDS church, the park, the home ownership, condos, and apartments. So I don't believe that we're really proposing a zoning use that's incompatible, and it is a urban central location that where the need for more housing is really acute.
Okay. There's a question from Wen Hexamer. The question is, what would it take for you to lose this battle?
I think that, ultimately the zoning goes through the process and ends up at city council. So.
And it was just why MF4 instead of MF2? Follow up.
I might bounce that to Megan or Nat. We could go with a lower zoning, but then we'd have to use the affordability unlocked, and it may depend on the final site plan and height. We're juggling. There's some 3-story buildings and some 4-story buildings, and there's the benefit to having the height because then we use less land. So we're MF4 gives us more flexibility, but there could be a lower class that might still work. Nat,
yeah, this is Nat. If I can chime in, so I'm the civil engineer, and I just want to say I also have the privilege of doing a lot of the public sidewalk and school in this area. And I have a 3-year-old, so you might hear them. But yeah, just to add to Walter's point, the zoning that requested is not so much on the unit count. As you might recall, the proposed density is much lower than what's allowed. And typically for these tax credit, these unit counts are pretty much locked in due to the funding. And part of the reason for MF4 is because the site has quite challenging topography. Sorry, that's my kiddo. It's quite challenging topography. So in order to, with an MF4, we can have a relatively higher cluster of building, smaller footprint, so we can preserve more tree and have a more compact footprint closer to the street without dealing with the topography. MF2 is a lot more challenging for the height perspective.
Okay.
And we only have we only at about 55% impervious cover, so we are a lot less than the allowable.
Okay. So I'll have a next question. You done, Nat? More or less? Okay. The question is from Alamoto. So what happens if for some reason foundation communities gets the zoning but can't get the financing or doesn't build? The question is, can someone else come in and put in apartments, big apartment building, if foundation communities gets the zoning, you can't do it? And the answer is, it would be incumbent upon whom the church decided to sell it to, whether they wanted to take that route or not. But that's true with any zoning case. It's the zoning is there. It's if the land, it doesn't run with the owner. It's an entitlement that the property has. Okay, I know there's 4 people with their hands up, but there's a lot of questions in the chat, so I'm going to try to knock most of these out. Will you from Rod Rice? Will you be doing a traffic impact TIA for this site?
Nat, do you want to?
Yeah, this is Nat. I can chime in. From a technical standpoint, this proposed density does not trigger a TIA and a traffic impact analysis. The city might decided to do what they call, sorry, it's a lighter version, what they call a neighborhood traffic analysis, but that's not something that is required from a technical threshold standpoint. Again, for all intent services, usually it's 2,000 trips. That's when the TIA is triggered, the traffic analysis.
So another question in regards to trees from Almato. Are you going to be chopping down trees to use more of the 8 acres?
No, there's heritage trees that are awesome and amazing on the site, and they're protected by city ordinance. There's protected trees that are also protected by city ordinance.
Okay. So another question is, why not build duplexes instead of multifamily?
We own some duplexes that we bought. They were built 30 years ago, the Buckingham duplexes and the Cherry Creek duplexes. Financially, just trying to build duplexes today doesn't work. You can't fit many units per acre, and the funding's not available for that. So what we've designed is our model that we know works and has worked at the Jordan and at Homestead and M Station and Cardinal Point and our other communities.
And how many stories will you, this is from Crystal Hess, how many stories do you think these will be?
3-story and 4-story buildings.
Okay. So you guys are also going to be, okay, I'm just, the question again, how many duplexes could be built on this space? It's 8 acres, 4 times 8, give you approximately 4 or 5 times 8 would give you the number of duplexes, because you can do about 4 duplexes an acre with streets and everything else. Okay, there's discussions about wanting more basic services there. Something to do with sidewalks, but you will be responsible for sidewalks in front of your property when you build it. You have to build to whatever the transportation criteria manual says that you have to build to.
Correct.
Okay. Trying to get, so I can get to the people with their hand, 5 people with their hands up. I appreciate your patience. Okay. I got through, well, a lot of the stuff in the chat is mostly, I think, comments. What design features will be, this is from Rod Rice, what design features will be incorporated to provide a step back and buffer space from the existing houses?
Megan or Nat or Connor?
Step in there. There are city compatibility step backs that require stepping back a substantial distance from any existing single family homes. However, because this is surrounded by roadway and church and multifamily, those don't really apply here. This is going to be held to the same kind of design and layout standards that all of the for-profit apartment complexes around here, except this is a nonprofit affordable housing.
Okay, now we're going to the phones, or the phones, to the speakers, their hands raised. Angela and Derek McKenzie, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, so it's less a question that hasn't already been asked, but I think more so just to make a statement. And I think it's what we're observing in the chat, as well as question that we have, or really a statement that we have. And I think it's, in terms of the company that's going to be building out the property, less concern about like the way that they do business and, the properties that they have. They're all good examples. My main concern, or our main concern, is really around, what's happening to civic land, right? There's 26 acres in the neighborhood that's zoned as civic. That's 3% of all land in Riverside. And 8 of those 26 acres is going to be used for this build. So based on that, we're losing a fairly high percentage of that civic designated land. In addition, that's going to change the dynamic of the neighborhood in the sense of putting in another building that's going to bring additional population and density to an already overpopulated portion of the city, one of the highest, where there's plenty of areas where that doesn't exist currently. In addition, it can be anticipated that there's going to be spillover into other civic areas that are already being shrunk as part of this build. So it's a real concern around the civic piece from our end, and I feel like a number of folks in the neighborhood share the same concern based on what I'm seeing here in the chat. So less a question, more a statement.
Okay, Steve Schmidt, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Thank you. We moved into this area about 40 years ago in 1981, and we moved here because it was a quiet, low traffic area, and it was a beautiful area. Someone's already addressed the traffic issue, but let me mention one more thing. Would you be working with the city to ensure that we don't have a lot of utility boxes in the parquet and utility risers? And would all the utilities be underground?
I think that's a good question for the civil engineers.
Yeah, I was gonna say, unless it's not feasible, like overhead power, as you know, Austin Energy has their own planning issue, but most utilities that are new will be underground. I can say that fairly comfortably. Now, did I miss part of your question related to the transportation, any kind of mitigation? The short answer is the city has a review process that certainly take into account some of that. Like if there's missing sidewalk, we'll put in. If there's crosswalk or missing ramp, we'll put in. And I believe there might be some question in the chat about, hey, how come there's some sidewalk that is missing on the other side of the park? You know, from an engineering standpoint, I would be happy to help facilitate that conversation where we do work for the city as well. And if there's missing sidewalk that, let's say this project is building, and then the city could take advantage of the same timing to add some sidewalk and crosswalk. Those are great thing that we can definitely consider similar to the trail. So just want to throw it out there that yes, we will meet all the code, and during the site plan process, if there's opportunity to add values to the neighborhood, we can definitely look at that as part of the design process.
Okay. The next question comes from Rosemary Guzman Hook. Rosemary, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks to the foundation community folks for being on the call. I have been a big fan of foundation communities and a donor in the past, but I'm a little bit confused. Why this location? When it's clear that there just isn't the room, there simply isn't the room. And the fact that now we know that there's not going to be any kind of a traffic report, so no one's going to be studying at all how this is, we already have a traffic issue. I mean, just trying to even get onto Parker Lane. So why that location? Why aren't they just selling you the land if that's what's going to be the case? And let's start there.
I guess, we think it's a great location. It's still very central to services and jobs, transportation connections. It is hard to find acreage in Austin that is centrally located. So, we love our Cardinal Point community and the 4 Points neighborhood, but it is way out there in far northwest Austin. It also happens to be an area where there are jobs as well. So there's employment and opportunity there. We just think it's a great location and an opportunity to build. Our office building, our main office is right around the corner, St. Edwards and I-35. So this is really close for us, and all the more important to make sure that it's well maintained and well designed, well built, well maintained.
And when you went through the list of areas to take a look at in which you could have a site of this size, what were other locations that you passed up to look at this particular location?
There was nothing else we could find this year that was this size and available at a price that worked. That wasn't already scooped up by conventional apartment builders, and we're always looking for land. So it's just, it's a challenge.
Because the other concern is, and I know that you've mentioned the location out at Mueller, and that is a very nice setup that you have there and some of the other places, but you have multiple entry and exit points for those, and that is not the case for this, and there won't be a way for you to have more than one single entry and exit place, which will be onto Parker Lane, in and out of Parker Lane. That is extremely close to an intersection that is already usually backed up by 1/8 of a mile on any given day. How would you plan to address that? It seems like that alone by itself would be not safe.
We're open to working with the neighborhood if there's a need and value to have a three-way stop there, and
that wouldn't be an option.
We do care about traffic concerns, and we'll look at ideas. Traffic's bad everywhere in Austin, so if we use that as a filter to screen locations, we would never build here. But I know that's not a very satisfactory answer, but it is really a big challenge citywide.
Walter, if I can hop in here for a second, we took a look at the development around here, and it's very clear that this area is facing the same challenge that a lot of other areas are, which is that your traffic isn't actually generated by the people who live on your street. It's people who live outside of the area who are coming through, and this development would add a pretty small percentage increase in the capacity. But pedestrian safety, is something that you're concerned about? It is a very, very long stretch of Parker without a pedestrian crossing. And as an engineering firm, we'd be happy to talk to the city. This is the exact kind of roadway where they have installed pedestrian hybrid beacons and three-way and four-way stops to help enable the kids to get across the street safely. But in terms of traffic analysis, it's the same story as the rest. Unfortunately, it's people who live outside this area driving through it that are your traffic problems.
So you all did a traffic analysis or not?
It's just doing a preliminary analysis, looking at the densities around here. The traffic level on Parker just doesn't reflect the densities that are there.
Okay, I'm still not sure if I understand. So
Yeah,
you
so this
did
is
a
not,
traffic
just want to clarify that. So from a requirement standpoint, the proposed density does not trigger what the city would consider a required traffic impact analysis. But just to clarify on Connor's point, we do best practice in terms of how do we design to mitigate as much impact on our side as possible. And we are open to look at considering crosswalk or traffic calming devices with the community. But the density that we are proposing, it does not trigger a formal traffic impact analysis. We just use best practice.
The next question is a question. Mark Gibson, would you please unmute Mark and ask your question?
Hey, yeah, and I think this is less of a conversation for maybe foundation communities and more of the EROC, and maybe that's a time later, because truly, I don't think that this is about affordable housing or foundation communities. I do think it was well said earlier. This is just about another multifamily, complex, coming in. But really, the question I have for EROC is, again, this isn't the zoning meeting, and tell me if I'm wrong in that. This is about changing the, plan for the neighborhood. And the plan in the neighborhood, again, going through that document that was established in 2013 by the people in the neighborhood using a committee, had 4 goals for land use. The first goal was preserve and enhance the character of existing residential neighborhoods. The second goal was increase home ownership opportunities that are compatible with surrounding properties. Goal number 3 is improve the appearance, vitality, and safety of existing commercial corridors and community amenities, and encourage quality urban design and form that ensures adequate transition between commercial properties and adjacent residential properties. And goal number 4 is encourage a balanced mix of residential, civic, commercial, office, and other land uses without adversely affecting adjacent residential neighborhoods. And so to me, this property moving from civic to multifamily at all would violate 3, if not all 4 of those. And so really this is a question for EROC of how they are thinking of advocating for this property being changed, given that we're losing so much civic going to multifamily, which already makes up 83% of the structures that we have in the zone.
Okay. Right. So we're gonna. I don't know. Was that more of a statement, Mark, or
it's a question for the EROC committee members at the appropriate time. So that may not be now, but whenever that may be.
Okay. Well, the next person is Steve, just no last name. Steve, if you could unmute your microphone and ask your question, please. Steve? I can unmute you for you. No, I can only mute. So next person we're going to go to is Charlotte Edwards. Would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
I have two questions, and one is there a representative of the Ward Methodist Church in this group, and why not? The other question is, and I also put in the chat, if there are 1,000 empty or available apartments in this area, then why is the need so big to build additional housing?
I don't believe there's anyone from the church on the call. This is, we have an agreement with them, a ground lease agreement, so we're the ones moving forward with the project. There are not 1,000 vacant apartments. I don't know where that statistic's coming from, but Austin is very full. Perhaps some of the brand new luxury apartments that are being built in the area may be sitting vacant, but what we're seeing is a waiting list for affordable housing everywhere.
Okay, we have one more person. Okay, have Fred Dworkin. Fred, would you unmute yourself and then ask your question? And then we're going to go to the chat because there's a lot of questions piling up. We have about 15 minutes left in this meeting, so we might be able to go a little long.
Yeah, but, I'll rebut Mr. Moreau in that a neighbor did a simple search, and I think he just chatted it inside of the link. Anybody can click it. They can see all of the available apartments that are in the price range that Mr. Moreau's group would develop. My question is, and we've referenced the lease, is the lease with the Methodist Church signed, and does it have contingencies? That's the first question. And the second question is, does your plan address lack of public transportation? There is no bus line on Parker going by the map that Miss Meredith was so kind enough to show. So lease in place with the Methodist Church, is it signed? Is it concrete, or does it have contingencies? And what are we going to do about public transportation? Because there is no bus line. And I think we've all noted that there's only one entrance in and out of that property.
We have a signed agreement with the church. And while there's no bus stop in front of the site, there's great public transit access pretty close by in Old Torf. And there's no perfect site. There's no site that's got everything perfectly lined up. But I really believe that this does meet the goals of the plan and is sensitive to the surrounding area. I think that's probably just a point. Agree to disagree.
So just a couple retorts there too. You also mentioned that there's a wait list on all of your properties. We checked earlier, and there's a wait list on only 2, which are the brand new ones, which are the perfect properties because they're right next to a grocery store and right in the middle of Mueller. The other one is right behind a grocery store in the middle of all that pristine open space. The one that you showed on Slaughter Lane. Is the lease that you signed with the Methodist Church, is that a lease? Is it a memorandum of understanding? What is the characteristic of the agreement that you signed with the Methodist Church?
I'm really not going to get into the details with you over that, Fred. I'm sorry that I don't think that's relevant to the zoning case.
It's absolutely relevant. because we'd like to know if the Methodist Church has the ability to get out of whatever agreement they have with you the moment that this zoning changes, and then be able to take a multifamily 4 zoning and put a 5-story multiplex in that property.
I can confirm that we have site control. So it's not, the Methodist Church can't go through zoning and change their mind.
Okay, Steve, you unmuted there for a second, then you muted back. Could you ask your question? Because I mean, we're quickly.
This is Steve. I don't know if it's the Steve you were asking about.
No, it's Steve. No, just Steve with no last name. Not
well,
Steve
I'll take your time. This is Steve Schmidt. I would like to point out that this hasn't been pointed out yet, but when there's a traffic accident on Interstate 35 on the northbound lanes, a lot of the traffic goes off onto Parker Lane. There's times when we can't even get out of our street. So I kind of disagree with the fact that there's no more attention being paid to the traffic situation. Also, I've seen gridlock at Parker Lane and Old Torf because cars going westbound will back up that far. If there were a right turn lane onto the access road, that'd be different. There's things the city could do to alleviate that problem. And I would be worried that this would it's not going to get better, and it'll get maybe just only slightly worse, but it's already bad enough that something needs to be done. So maybe the additional people in the new complex may not add that much, but it doesn't take much to make the situation complete gridlock during rush hour traffic. And most of this was pre-pandemic, but even now we can see the traffic backed up from the interstate past the Whataburger, past all the way to Parker Lane. Just thought I'd throw that in. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. The next person who is Rebecca Pope. Rebecca, you've already unmuted. Would you please ask your question?
Yes, this question I have is really for the city. And I wanted to know how much weight the petition holds that's been circulating.
I don't know of any petition. Is it for surrounding property owners, or is it just, oh, I just sign here because you may or may not support this project?
Surrounding property owners that may or may not support the
Texas state law says that people representing, if you can get signatures of people representing 20% of the property adjacent within the subject tract, this 8-acre site, that would trigger a supermajority vote of the city council, which now I think used to be like 5. I don't know what it is now with the 10-1, but it's like 7 or 8 votes. I'm not sure, but that would be triggered. That according to state law, that's what that would be. If it was just a petition of people expressing their support or lack of support thereof for the project, and then council would take that and consider it as they will. I can't, they would look at it as one more point in their decision-making process.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we'll go with what we'll do is we'll get with people who have their hands up, and then we'll go back and look in the chat and try to get as many of those questions, and we'll try our best to answer those and put them up on the web, because we're really running up against the clock here. So Paula Kaufman, would you please unmute and ask your question?
Hey, Walter. Yes. One of the things I think a lot of the concern is if you upzone to the MF4 where 400 units could be built, but you're only going to be building 136 units, is there another type of zoning that you could look to that's not quite so intense? So it seems like maybe something a little bit more in between, because people understand that the zoning is going to run with the land. And actually the South River City citizens has already voted to put a moratorium on upzoning from single family housing to multi-family housing, because we're absolutely being inundated with those kinds of requests all through the neighborhood. And with this difficulty for the citizens to participate, we're kind of asking for a little bit of time so that we could actually get residents to speak to the different people in the city.
I think the short answer, Paula, is there is a lesser zoning that can work, but we may need to use the affordability unlocked, which may be less desirable for some folks because it opens up, no parking requirements and other issues. So there may be ways to look at the timing of the zoning as well, that's not finalized until the financing is finalized, but the two are both going to come together this summer. So, and we have site control, so it's not a bait and switch kind of thing where the church can kick us out and then, go to something different. What we've proposed here is the 135 units would be what we build, not more or not less.
Thank you.
I do want to say too, before we run out of time, we're very happy to hear concerns, see if there's common ground and ways to make adjustments and answer questions. Please feel free to reach out to us at Foundation Communities, and we'll get back to you. I understand the concerns. There's opposition to any zoning change at all, and so that's not something that obviously we agree with. And but when it comes to solutions on traffic or how to work on that trail or other things that we can do to address concerns, we want to do that. So happy to talk more.
Do we want to give Steve with no last name with his hand up one more chance to ask his question?
Yes.
Is that the person who has the question, Steve?
Maybe if the organizer could take him off of mute. I think he's having issues with getting.
It just went off mute a few seconds ago and then it went back on mute. Okay, he's off mute. Now? Okay, Steve, let's go. You got it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll talk fast. My name is Reverend Dr. Steve Larson, and myself and my nonprofit, which is called Our House, has been working in that neighborhood now for 4 years. We worked and began to work with Travis High School, and majority of the students, many of them walk down Old Torf coming home from school every day. And they don't just go to the left when they get down there, they go to the right because there's hundreds of apartments. That neighborhood has become the highest crime rate neighborhood in town. And we were very involved before the Methodists sold it with APD and with other neighborhood organizations and people trying to build a really good neighborhood center for the many hundreds of youth that live in the neighborhood who have no place to play, no place to swim, not even a park. If you go farther down Old Torf to Pleasant Valley. And so what my concern and our concern is that we can not only serve the community that they build the apartment complex for, but that they can also serve Old Torf Riverside. We so badly need something there different. And you talk to APD, this has become a high crime rate neighborhood because there's nothing to do. The kids go home from school and there's nothing going on, except maybe they can figure out how to sell some dope on the street. And that's probably what they do. And then they end up going to the state jail. So that's my concern. and I really have gotten involved in that neighborhood to the point of really want foundations to do something, not just for all the people that live there, but for the community as well, especially all those people not along Old Forest and Riverside, both to the north and the south. Okay, I'm sorry, I talked too long, but that was quick.
No, you didn't.
Okay, we have 2 more questions I think we can knock off real quick, and then Maureen can go and talk about what's next in the process. Well, it's from question from Fred. Would the tax credits be available if you acquired one of the existing multifamily units instead of building at the site?
No.
Okay. Are there? Okay. There are playscapes and other foundation communities that are locked. Is that you secure your other playscapes in your projects, Walter?
Yeah, we do lock some of the sports courts, so they're not used, and especially with COVID, we've had to close some playgrounds. So I'm not sure specifically which properties he's talking about.
Okay, well, we're at 7:31 by my clock, and I scanned through the questions in the chat. Maureen, you want to pop up your contact information and let everyone know what the next phase what the next steps in the process are?
Sure, let me try to get that up. Hold on one sec. Let me know if you can see.
We can see your screen.
Okay, excellent. So again, here's my contact information and Kate Clark's contact information. Staff will meet and make a recommendation. We will work with the planning contact team for your planning contact team recommendation. And then we will schedule it for Planning Commission. We are looking at the March 23rd Planning Commission hearing date. We have not scheduled a City Council hearing date yet. So I will work with Malcolm and any other, I guess, neighborhood association that wants to submit a letter of recommendation. And of course, anybody who lives within the area or who wants to submit a letter for the staff report, we can do that. But we are looking at March 23rd Planning Commission.
Okay. So that end of the meeting for tonight. I'd like to thank all of you for taking some time out for this evening to come here and ask questions and listen. If you have other questions that come up later, or like Maureen said, you can email her or Kate and submit your questions to them, and we'll, at least for Maureen, I can speak for Maureen, we'll do our best to get those questions back to you, and we'll post them up on the website, so on the Speak Up Austin page, so people could have the opportunity to view the questions. Also, this meeting is being recorded, and we will be posting it on the Speak Up Austin page within 5 business days. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
I don't know if I can still ask a question, but I have a question for Maureen.
Sure, I'm still here.
Yeah, what is the Planning Commission criteria for recommending an upzone?
Well, they
vote.
Well, I mean, what typically happens, if you've been to a planning commission hearing, is they get the staff case report. And then at the public hearing, they hear from the applicant. They hear from people who are opposed. They hear from people who are in favor. They ask a bunch of questions, and then they take a vote. So it, you know, it can run the gamut of their criteria. So I guess I don't really know how else to answer that.
No, there's no statutory.
Well, that's a great answer.
There's no statutory criteria that the Planning Commission must adhere to. It's based upon whatever they feel is the right choice in the matter.
Okay, and then who's the commission composed of? Who are the members of the commission?
Each council member gets to appoint one person for the commission. There are some what's the term? They're not appointed, but because of their
Ex
position,
officio.
ex officio members from the Board of Adjustment. There's an ex officio member from the school district, and I think there's several others who can. It's been a long time since I've read that section of the charter. Then I think the mayor gets to appoint 2 or something like that, because there's 13 members. I think there's 13 members on the Planning Commission. But there is always an odd number, so there won't be a tie vote.
That's helpful. And it just requires a simple majority?
Yes. It's only with council if there is a valid petition that I mentioned earlier about the people representing 20% of the property within 200 feet of the subject site. That would trigger a supermajority of council. Otherwise, it's basically a simple majority of council vote.
How does the valid petition affect the Planning Commission vote?
It does not.
Hearing? Okay, so you still have the hearing vote. It just has to. Go ahead.
It may be a data point. It'd be okay. That's kind of be a data point for them to consider.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for organizing this and allowing us to have this space in this forum. Interesting debate, and the Foundations community has a very wonderful set of properties, and we've got an interesting community here. So it should be an interesting debate at the planning hearing. And you said that's the March 23rd, right?
Yes.
And everybody who lives within 500 feet, owns property, has a utility account or a business, or represents an organization that boundaries is listed with the city registry will receive notice of that. If you live further than 500 feet away and don't fit that other criteria somehow, you won't necessarily receive a letter in the mail saying that there's a public hearing.
Yeah, one of the curious things about that is that, there's a couple apartment complexes on the back end of that property. And I'd imagine there's maybe up to 1,000 people within 500 feet that live in those complexes. And they're basically disenfranchised because they won't receive any notice. It will be the landowner.
They will.
And they'll have, will they receive individual,
yes.
Each individual unit will get a.
Yes,
will get
everyone
a
with a utility account will receive a notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if the utilities are paid by the apartments, because a lot of those are efficiencies, utilities included.
I can't speak to that. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, it just struck me that there was nobody that is from the community on this call, like that community, the kind of Spanish-speaking apartment community.
So I do know 1,492 meeting notices went out. So that's the number of people on the official notification list. Just as an FYI.
Right on. Well, thank you. You all have been super kind, especially putting up with all the emails and stuff and back and forth as we understand this process.
No problem. We're here.
Good evening. I'm going to stop the recording now, Maureen.
Okay.
Thank you.